Having gone over the controller, support, and tank class over the past few weeks, it's time to take a look at the damage dealer class, both the largest class in the game and the one with the simplest definition, right? Well, in this video we'll take a look at all the brawlers in the damage dealer class, and see if they fit into the definition of a true damage dealer in Brawl Stars, and then talk about the overarching issues that the class has as a whole. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to keep up with my videos. Second, join our Discord server. We have some fun stuff to do there, like our very own 1v1 ranked called Gauntlet. Link is in the description and the end of the video. Finally, consider becoming a channel member if you're interested in supporting the channel and have ample disposable income for some cool perks, like watching videos early or getting to decide on future video ideas. Actually, that's not all. I have another channel where I make beats, so if you're curious as to how bad or good I am, make sure to check it out. Link is in the description and in the info card at the top of your screen. First, we must define a damage dealer. Like last time, let's look at Brawl's definition and then come up with our own. According to Brawl Stars, the damage dealer class has a very high DPS, but interestingly also a very high health. These guys are strong against tanks and assassins, but are weak against marksmen and throwers. As for my own definition, I don't really have much to add. Damage dealing is really the main point of a damage dealer, and they should be a bit strong against tanks and assassins. However, I would say that big health shouldn't be as big of a factor for damage dealers. Like, they should have a solid health, but it shouldn't be not too large. Their main function isn't survival like tanks, it's pure damage output, especially against brawlers who have high health to counter them. Of course, the definition of a class is subjective for everyone, though I think we can all mostly agree on this definition for a damage dealer. With this definition, let's start taking a look at the class as a whole and see how they fit into that definition. First off, we start with Shelly, just like how everyone starts Brawl Stars. I mean, she's basically the perfect example of a damage dealer. Her entire purpose is simply to deal as much damage as possible, and she fits that quite perfectly with her super and hypercharge dealing utterly diabolical damage amounts. As for her matchup, she's quite poor against throwers and marksmen, though of course that's map dependent, and she's very good against assassins and tanks. I would even go so far as to say the definition of the damage dealer class was based on her. Now we go to Nita. This is an interesting case. Nita by herself is far from a damage dealer. Her DPS is quite mediocre, though she does have a very fast reload speed. Of course, considering her bear, she would have much more DPS, right? Well, not exactly. Bruce is not really known for his damaging abilities, and more known for being a tanking figure to allow for Nita to push up. Sure, she has a hyper bear, which heavily increases the Bruce's DPS, especially in Heist, but overall her bear isn't really known for its DPS. As for Nita, she's not really a great damage dealer, but the problem is that she doesn't really fit into any other class, which I will talk more about later. Cold is up next, and he fits in perfectly, obviously. His entire purpose is based around damage dealing, though funnily enough, he fits kinda mediocre to Brawl's definition. His health is quite squishy, he does well against throwers, and he gets countered by assassins for the most part. Even so, I would say he's a great example of a damage dealer. Next up is 8-Bit. 8-Bit is a sort of jack of all trades. He has shades of tankiness with his very large health, shades of support with his ability to buff teammate damage, and of course, his insane damage potential. Even with all of this in consideration, 8-Bit is basically a perfect damage dealer according to Brawl's very own definition. His health is high, he is pretty solid against tanks and assassins, gets hard countered by throwers, and is pretty bad against snipers. Rico is up next, and he basically has the same explanation as Colt. He's all about damage dealing, though he does have a better matchup at closer ranges than Colt, especially against assassins. So yeah, 100% damage dealer. Carl is up next, and this gets interesting. He has an argument for damage dealing with his super being able to deal crazy damage, and based on the surrounding environment, his main attack can deal lots of burst damage as well. Of course, his damage dealing isn't really as crazy as some of the other damage dealers, and is a lot more situation based. Furthermore, he also has some pretty solid assassination technique, especially with his flying hook gadget and his super. To be honest, it's not enough to overpower Samus Stealer classification though. However, according to Brawl's definition, his matchups are a little whack, as he's pretty solid against both throwers and marksmen, and he's a pretty great example of a generalist brawler. Overall, he doesn't really fit into any other class other than damage dealer, but he is a pretty mediocre damage dealer. Colette is up next, and she surprisingly fits quite well into this class. Her whole shtick is dealing lots of damage to certain brawlers, though to be fair, she is quite trash at dealing damage against certain other brawlers. She fits perfectly into Brawl's definition, having good health, and being very strong against tanks, while pretty trash against marksmen and throwers. Lola now, and she's another solid damage dealer. I mean, what more can I say? She's really similar to Colt and Rico with her matchups and her whole design, and she has huge damage potential. Pearl now, and I mean basically the same thing as Lola. Her damage potential is a bit worse, but still good enough to be considered a damage dealer. Her matchups are a little more interesting, being a sniper counter, and much better at countering aggro brawlers. Once again, she's not exactly perfect as a DPS, but fits very neatly into Brawl's definition, and more importantly, doesn't fit well into any other class. Terra's up next, and this is another interesting case. She has quite solid DPS, but not as crazy as some of the other damage dealers we've seen earlier. Honestly, you could make a claim for her in 2 other classes. She's an okay controller with her super and hyper giving her tons of area control, and more importantly tons of pressure. However, she's also a great assassin, though she brings enemies to her rather than going towards enemies, which a lot of other assassins do. Overall, she's not a horrible damage dealer, and according to Brawl's definition, she fits, but she could also go into multiple other classes as well. Eve is up next, and this is complicated. Eve barely deals enough damage to be considered an actual damage dealer, even when you take into account her babies as well. To be honest, she feels more of a marksman than a damage dealer, and even then she doesn't fit well, as she would be the only marksman who shoots multiple projectiles. Overall, she doesn't fit any class in my opinion, and definitely not the damage dealer class. RT is up next, and he's an interesting case. He has 2 different forms, with both possibly being considered in different classes. His first form is extremely similar to that of a marksman, though there are damage dealer elements with the whole marking mechanic. However, his second form is definitely a huge damage dealer, with a bit of assassination sprinkled in. Overall, I wouldn't say he's the perfect damage dealer, but I would say dealing large amounts of damage is still his main purpose over anything else, so I would put him in the damage dealer class. Clancy now, and he's not really an interesting case. He basically fits perfectly into Brawl's definition with his whole shtick about being insane damage potential and mainly countering aggro brawlers. He's also very weak against throwers and marksmen, but only at lower stages. Now we go to Mo, who's an interesting case. At one point in time, namely his broken release, he dealt crazy amounts of damage and could 100% be considered a damage dealer. However, nowadays, he's more of a chip damager to get his super, and he uses his super mainly to assassinate enemies, having a much more assassin-like playstyle than a damage dealer playstyle. Now Lumi. She's an interesting case as well. Yes, she has damage dealing potential, but once again, like Carl, it's very conditional, and for her, it's based on how close the enemies are to her. Honestly, she fits better into the controller class. There's always a threat of standing near the maces and getting damaged, so she's pretty solid at controlling enemy movement, especially considering her gadgets as a bonus. Overall, I would say she could fit in either damage dealer or controller based on the situation and how she's played. Now, and this is a hot point of contention, Mina. Damage dealer or assassin? Well, in my opinion, she doesn't really fit into either. Her damage is way too inconsistent to really fit into the damage dealers, but she doesn't exactly move like an assassin, though she does have assassin-like qualities, especially considering her high mobility and her super. Overall, I would definitely say she's more of an assassin than a damage dealer, but she doesn't fit into any class perfectly. Now, Spike. This is pretty simple. Yes, he deals lots of damage, but I would say he's definitely a controller. The AoE his main attack covers is quite good, and his super seals the deal, basically blocking off an area, somewhat like a mini Lu super, which is exemplified even further with his hypercharge. Search now, and he's basically the same as Clancy, however, he doesn't really have the same damage potential, relying more on crowd control with his super than the pure damage Clancy relies on. Last but not least, Chester. I mean, he's basically perfect according to Brawl's definition. For me, it's the same situation as someone like Surge or Clancy, big damage mainly against aggro brawlers and at short ranges. And with that, we've gone over every single damage dealer in the game. Now, let's talk about the overarching theme that pervades this class. Yes, there's lots of damage dealers that do deserve to be there, but there's a lot that don't. Like the controller class, it feels there's lots of brawlers in this class who don't exactly fit into any other class, and were just put into the damage dealer class, sort of like the Hermes cabin from Percy Jackson, if anyone still knows that series. However, there becomes a much more clearer divide, even within the damage dealers that actually fit into Brawl's definition. On one hand, there's the pure damage dealers, whose damage output mainly rests upon skill level, and have the most actual damage potential. Brawlers like Cole, Rico, Lola, 8-Bit, and Pearl, among others, fit into this class. On the other side, you have what I consider fighter brawlers. These are brawlers that are considered more of an aggro shutdown class, characterized by fighting mainly at short to mid ranges, and having incredible damage potential against brawlers like tanks and assassins, while struggling against brawlers like marksmen and throwers. Brawlers in this class could be Surge, Clancy, Colette, Chester, Mina, and of course, some others. Overall, it feels like the damage dealer class has so many different factions in it, despite having what should be a pretty simple definition. You have tons of aggro defense brawlers, or in other words, fighters. And of course, you have the brawlers that don't fit into anywhere, such as Eve. To be fair, the fault doesn't lie with Brawl's own definition, as many of these fighter brawlers would be classified as damage dealers under that definition. But that's no fun, is it? As always, thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.